You know what's interesting about people with extremely high intelligence? They almost never look the way you expect them to. When most people imagine someone with a very high IQ, they picture something obvious. Someone constantly speaking, constantly explaining, constantly proving how much they know. Someone who dominates conversations, solves problems out loud, and makes their intelligence visible. But real psychology suggests something very different. In fact, many people with extremely high IQs don't stand out in loud, obvious ways at all. They blend in, they stay quiet, and sometimes they even get misunderstood because intelligence at its core isn't about how much you know. It's about how your brain processes the world. And that processing shows up in ways most people don't recognize. Not through performance, but through patterns. Subtle ones, quiet ones, the kind of behaviors that, from the outside, don't always look like intelligence. But once you understand them, everything starts to make sense. The first pattern is something that often gets misread immediately: spending time alone. Highly intelligent people tend to spend a lot of time in solitude. And not because they dislike people, not because they're antisocial, but because their brain is constantly active, even in silence. Especially in silence. While most people rely on external stimulation to stay engaged, a high IQ brain doesn't need that. It generates its own stimulation. Thoughts, connections, questions, ideas, they keep running in the background. And solitude creates the space for that process to unfold. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reflection, and complex thinking, functions best without constant interruption. That's why silence doesn't feel empty to them. It feels productive. There was a study from the London School of Economics that found something interesting. Highly intelligent individuals reported lower satisfaction from frequent social interaction compared to others. Not because socializing is bad, but because their brain often prefers depth over volume, and constant interaction interrupts that depth. So when someone chooses to be alone, it's easy to assume they're withdrawing. But sometimes they're just thinking. And that leads into the second pattern: constant curiosity. People with very high IQs don't just ask questions when they need answers. They ask questions because their brain naturally searches for patterns. Why did that happen? Why do people behave this way? Why does this system work like that? And it's not always big philosophical questions. Sometimes it's small, everyday observations. But the pattern is always the same. Their brain doesn't settle for surface-level understanding. It keeps digging. Curiosity becomes automatic, almost like a reflex. And over time, that builds a deeper, more connected understanding of the world. But from the outside, it can look different. It can look like overthinking, or skepticism, or even being difficult, because they don't accept things at face value. They want to understand what's underneath. And that leads to the third pattern: talking to themselves. At first, this one sounds strange, because socially, it's often seen as unusual. But in psychology, it has a name: self-directed speech. And it's actually a sign of active cognitive processing. When someone talks to themselves, they're not just making noise. They're organizing thoughts, reinforcing memory, improving focus. Studies have shown that verbalizing thoughts can increase cognitive control and strengthen working memory. So when someone quietly narrates their thinking, they're not distracted. They're engaged, deeply. Their brain is essentially thinking out loud, and it helps structure complex ideas in real time. But again, from the outside, it can be misinterpreted because most people only see the behavior, not the process behind it. And that misunderstanding shows up again in the fourth pattern: being comfortable saying, "I don't know." Most people associate intelligence with certainty, with having answers, with confidence. But highly intelligent individuals often do the opposite. They acknowledge uncertainty. They admit when they don't know something. And that's not weakness. It's awareness. In psychology, this connects to something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where individuals with lower knowledge tend to overestimate their understanding, while those with higher knowledge recognize how much complexity exists. The more you understand something, the more you realize how much you don't understand. So instead of pretending to know, they stay open. They stay curious, and they update their understanding when new information appears, which leads directly into another pattern: overthinking, or at least what looks like overthinking. An analytical brain doesn't switch off easily. The same cognitive systems that help solve complex problems also analyze everyday situations, conversations, decisions, possibilities. What did that person mean? What could happen next? What's the best option? From the outside, it can look like hesitation or indecision, but internally, it's exploration. The brain is running multiple mental models at once, comparing outcomes, testing scenarios, and sometimes that process takes time because it's thorough. But that same depth is what allows them to see connections others miss, and it shows up again in an unexpected way. Humor. People often think humor is simple, but it's not. Understanding humor requires complex cognitive processing. You have to recognize patterns, break expectations, and connect ideas that don't usually belong together. Studies in intelligence research have shown a clear correlation between higher IQ and advanced humor processing, especially in forms like sarcasm, irony, and abstract humor, because those require multiple layers of interpretation. So when someone has a sharp or unconventional sense of humor, it's often a reflection of how their brain processes information. But humor is just one expression of a deeper ability, the ability to adapt, which brings us to another key pattern: changing their mind. For many people, beliefs are tied to identity. Once they form an opinion, they defend it, even when new evidence appears. But highly intelligent individuals tend to treat beliefs differently, as models, not identities, temporary structures that can be updated. So when new information challenges what they think, they adjust, not because they're uncertain, but because they prioritize accuracy over consistency. In psychology, this is called cognitive flexibility, and it's one of the strongest indicators of advanced problem-solving ability. The ability to revise your thinking instead of defending it. But from the outside, it can look like inconsistency or a lack of confidence, because people expect stability even when it's incorrect, and this pattern of misunderstanding keeps repeating. Someone who spends time alone may seem antisocial. Someone who asks many questions may seem skeptical. Someone who changes their mind may seem unsure. But often, these are just surface interpretations of deeper processes. And those processes show up again in another pattern: thinking at night. Many individuals with high intelligence report feeling more mentally active late at night. When everything is quiet, when distractions disappear, their mind becomes more focused. Some researchers suggest this connects to evolutionary psychology, the idea that individuals with higher cognitive flexibility adapt more easily to non-traditional patterns, including being active during hours when others are not. But there's also a simpler explanation. At night, there's space, no interruptions, no expectations, and that allows deeper thinking to emerge, which connects to another quiet pattern: observing more than speaking. In social situations, highly intelligent individuals often don't respond immediately. They watch first. They gather information. They notice tone, behavior, emotional shifts. They're not disengaged. They're analyzing, and once they respond, it's usually more intentional, more precise, because it's based on more information. But to others, it can look like silence or hesitation, when in reality, it's processing. And finally, there's one pattern that ties everything together: the constant search for meaning. High intelligence often comes with increased awareness of complexity, of contradictions, of the layers behind simple things. And that awareness naturally leads to questions, not just about the world, but about life itself. Why do people behave the way they do? Why do certain patterns repeat? What actually matters? It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, just a question in the background of the mind, but it doesn't go away because the brain keeps searching, not for answers alone, but for understanding. And that might be the most important thing to realize. Intelligence isn't just about solving problems. or memorizing information, or performing well in structured systems. At its core, it's about how your mind interacts with reality, how it notices patterns, how it questions assumptions, how it connects ideas, and how it keeps exploring even when there's no immediate reward. So the next time you see someone who doesn't match the typical image of intelligence, someone quiet, someone observant, someone who spends time alone, it might not be what it looks like on the surface. Because sometimes the most complex thinking happens in the quietest ways.